one does not simply rank the Middle-earth films. Let's talk about it. Hello everyone, my name is Broku and welcome back. Now today continues our journey of review slash ranking films here on the channel. And specifically today we're going to be talking about the Middle-earth films, both the Hobbit trilogy and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now the Lord of the Rings trilogy is highly regarded as one of the greatest trilogies of all time. You know, this is competing against Toy Story, Godfather, and many more classic, the Star Wars OG trilogy, which we just reviewed in our last video as well. The Hobbit trilogy isn't as highly regarded, but today we're going to break down all the films, the pros and cons of each, and then pit them against each other and see which ultimately is the best Middle-earth film. Hope you guys stick around, and if you guys enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more ranks and reviews of franchises in the future. Now, without wasting any more time, let's get into it. Okay, so first up, we have the Hobbit trilogy, starting off with The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. Before I start breaking down these three Hobbit films, I'm just going to say the first con I have of all three of them is the format they were shot in. So pretty much standard films are shot in 24 frames per second. The Hobbit trilogy, Peter Jackson decided to shoot in 48 frames per second. And just quickly give you a rundown, if you guys ever seen like soap operas, you know, live sports and stuff, the movies are supposed to feel and look cinematic, and shooting at 48 frames per second gives it that soap opera look. A lot more mistakes are easily noticeable and stuff. It gives it a weird like gloss over. I don't really know how best to explain it. If you guys are interested in, you know, learning more about it, I do advise you to look it up. Overall, it's just kind of like gives it more of like a fake feel, and then the mistakes are more easily noticeable. But enough with the technical talk of the 48 frames versus 24 frames debate. In Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, at the beginning, we see Bilbo writing a book, and then at the Return of the King, he shows Frodo and gives him the book, and it's all over. And pretty much in that book details kind of like an adventure Bilbo had early on in his life. And in The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey is pretty much the start of where that book, you know, pretty much starts off. In A Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, we have Martin Freeman playing Bilbo Baggins, who's going to be my first pro. I believe Martin Freeman does a great job as playing Bilbo. Also, we have Ian McKellen returning as Gandalf. Again, more Gandalf, the better, honestly. He's great in all three of these movies. As well as our other main protagonist is going to be Richard Armitage as Thorin Oakenshield. He's like a leader of the dwarf company we come to know, and pretty much the main character we follow through that group of dwarves. The other dwarves, unfortunately, are more forgettable. We do have like Gimli's dad and a couple other memorable ones. Keeley, he has like a love story, and he is more integral to like side stories moving on. But unfortunately, a lot of these other dwarves, like, it's hard to remember names, and unless you're like writing them down, you're like constantly remembering. A lot of them, they're just there. They don't really stick out in a memorable way for you to memorize who they are. Again, the main player is Thorin Oakenshield, Martin Freeman as Bilbo and Gandalf, and then we get some elves along the way in the other movies. So I do think a con is how they use the dwarves. Another con with The Unexpected Journey, and pretty much, you know, all three, you know, I'm going to be saying that a lot, you know, because the same mistakes that this first movie makes, the others make as well, is the overusage of CGI. And there's no better example than pretty much when you first start seeing orcs in this movie. The original trilogy were all practical effects mainly, unless you did like wide, far away shots of huge armies. That would use some CGI, but any up close, any persons, they're all in makeup. And in here, it's easily noticeable that they're all CGI. Thorin's main antagonist in this movie is Azog, the Defiler. He and Thorin have a history of fighting each other, and it's Thorin's main antagonist, and he's full CGI. He and Thorin and the dwarves have the ultimate climactic battle at the end of this movie, and anytime orcs are fighting in any of these movies, or goblins, it looks so much worse than movies that came out 9, 10, 11 years prior. And the CGI overall, it doesn't hold up as well as it should. Some parts do look really good, but overall it's like a lot of effects look worse here in these movies than they did in Lord of the Rings, which is kind of sad to see. Another problem with The Unexpected Journey and the other Hobbit films is the story is really stretched out. Now, the Hobbit book is shorter than any of the Lord of the Rings books, and somehow they stretched 3 movies out of this one book. And I know the Lord of the Rings movies have extended editions, and they're generally pretty long movies as well. But even the Hobbit movies got extended editions as well. And when you watch the theatrical cuts of these movies, you're like, how did they leave anything out? Because they're so bloated, especially like the first hour, 30 minutes to an hour of The Unexpected Journey. It just drags its feet so much. There are only really like a couple more memorable scenes for me for the beginning part, which I'll go over. I do enjoy once the company of dwarves get into Bilbo's house. Obviously, Gandalf laid a little secret message on Bilbo's door to get all the dwarves to come in, and we're introduced 1 to 2 at a time. There is a lot of singing in this movie, weirdly enough, but I do really like Misty Mountains Cold, that Thorin and the dwarves sing. The song is really good. The other songs we get later on in this movie, like the Goblin King and stuff, not as good, but that's a con. Another really interesting scene in The Unexpected Journey is in the Fellowship of the Ring, when Aragorn's leading the hobbits through the Shire on their way to Rivendell. They come across stone trolls, and there is a story, obviously, of how they got turned into stone. And we get to see that whole scene interaction in Unexpected Journey. So the dwarves and Gandalf are, just setting up camp on their journey, and they come across, or a couple of them come across trolls. They get captured, a bunch of shenanigans happen, and it's Bilbo kind of like having to outwit trolls and last long enough till Gandalf ultimately arrives, and sunlight is the weakness of trolls, we find out, and able to like stone the trolls essentially. Bilbo comes off really witty in this movie. He does very likes to keep his house in order, very neat, very tidy type of person. And I really do enjoy the scenes where he gets to use his wit, which I feel like is best used in this movie. A little bit in Desolation of Smaug towards the end when he's to actually meet Smaug, but especially in this one, whenever he's talking to the dwarves in the beginning, the trolls. Or my next favorite scene in the movie is the whole Bilbo and Gollum introduction and how Bilbo ultimately gets the One Ring. I'm glad that scene is played out. So ultimately there's 3 riddles. They're trying to outwit each other, and ultimately Bilbo does get the best of them and steals Gollum's ring essentially. That whole interaction is really good. Probably my favorite part of this movie in general.
You said ask me a question. Well, that is my question. What have I got in my pocket?
3 guesses, precious. You must give us 3.
3 guesses. Very well. Guess away.
Houses.
Wrong. Guess again.
Fishbones, goblins, teeth, white shells, bats' wings, knife! Oh, shut up!
Wrong again. Last guess.
String! Or nothing.
2 guesses at once. Wrong both times. So. Come on in. I won the game. You promised to show me the way out.
Did we say so, precious? Did we say so? What has it got in its pockets?
Last thing I want to say about this movie, even though I do enjoy Thorin as a character, and he does really complain about Bilbo a lot in this movie, I think a little too much. I think he's too hard on him. Thorin really bullies Bilbo, essentially saying he's, not cut out for this journey. He should just go home, constantly trying to get him to turn around, and like he's not one of us. And it's really mean. The other dwarves are like even looking at it as like, Thorin, that's not cool. And they try and, build Bilbo up. And obviously it's more triumphant when Bilbo it looks like he is going to give up and he goes away, but he does come back and save, and like Thorin has a turn, and like, wow, I was wrong about Bilbo. So now we have to rank An Unexpected Journey. And while I appreciate the main characters, Thorin, Bilbo, Gandalf, the side characters, pretty forgettable for now. The CGI is way overused, and again, this movie does drag its feet. The extended edition is even worse than that. For the Hobbit trilogy, I do just recommend the theatrical cuts. The extended editions don't add too much to these movies, unlike they do in the original Lord of the Rings movies. So, An Unexpected Journey, I'm going to rank a solid C. Again, it's a fine movie. If you like the Middle-earth movies, if you watch Lord of the Rings and you haven't seen the Hobbit movies, I do recommend watching them all. Again, just go in with tempered expectations because they are like a step below or a couple steps below what the Lord of the Rings movies do. If you want to see more of this world fleshed out prior to what we see in Lord of the Rings, I do recommend seeing it. Again, the Bilbo versus Gollum scene, it's kind of like worth the price of the ticket for me anyways. But overall, Unexpected Journey gets a C. Next up, we have Hobbit and the Desolation of Smaug. Now, this movie picks up right where we pretty much left off at the last one. So, to recap, the Eagles have come in and saved the day. They saved the dwarves and Bilbo from Azog and his supporters and started their journey to the Misty Mountain. And again, we'll start with the cons first of this movie. Again, CGI, not good. Again, some of it's okay, but it's not what you expect considering Lord of the Rings had better effects. In order to get to the Misty Mountains, our heroes have to travel through this forest that we find out is spider infested. Now, these is a really cool set of scenes. So pretty much Bilbo climbs a tree to pretty much get like a bird's eye view of like where they're going because they have no idea like what the right path is. He pops up above the trees, sees the mountain that's this way, calls down like, hey, it's this way, no response, dips back down, and no one's answering, and a set of little crazy action scenes with spiders ensues. So that's pretty cool. I do like the spider scene in this movie. Unfortunately, there's other scenes that like counteract it. So later on, the dwarves and Bilbo get captured by the elves, which we get to meet Legolas. Surprisingly, he's in this movie. Tauriel, a new character that was not in the books, as well as Legolas's dad. Now, Legolas's dad is played by Lee Pace, who I thought did a really great job as Thranduil. He plays pretty much a ruthless king.
Vast ignorance of the world, it festers and spreads. A shadow that grows in the dark. The sleepless malice as black as the oncoming wall of night. So it ever was. So will it always be. In time, all foul things come forth.
You were tracking a company of 13 dwarves. Why?
Not 13. Not anymore. A young one. The black-haired archer. We stuck him with a mortal shaft. Poison's in his blood. He'll be choking on it soon.
Answer the question, filth.
I would not antagonize her.
You like killing things, Orc. You like death. Then let me give it to you.
Tauriel, ego. Wow, he. I do not care about one dead dwarf. Answer the question. You have nothing to fear. Tell us what you know, and I will set you free.
You had orders to kill them. Why? What is Thorin Oakenshield to you?
The dwarf runt will never be king.
King? There is no king under the mountain, nor will there ever be. None would dare enter Erebor whilst the dragon lives.
You know nothing. Your world will burn.
What are you talking about?
Speak! Now time has come again. My master serves the one. Do you understand now, Elfling? Death is upon you. The flames of war are upon you.
And pretty much, as long as anyone outside of his kingdom does not care about, only cares about people inside. He does, love Legolas and Tauriel, his children, but again, he has no remorse for dwarves. And what was played off is more for laughs in Lord of the Rings between Legolas and Gimli. Yeah, they hate each other. It's like, haha, they hate each other. These Hobbit movies, like, they have like deep hatred for each other, both like Thorin towards elves and Thranduil towards dwarves. But nonetheless, they're captured, and it leads to how they escape. And there's this whole elaborate in barrels, where they get stowed away in barrels, and they get dumped into a river, and a whole action scene ensues. This whole scene looks terrible, way over usage of CGI. Just stuff is just happening all over the screen, and it does not look good at all. It essentially just looks like a water park ride. So they ultimately escape and from their capturement and get away from Azog and his orcs. Next, that kind of leads us to the next part of the movie, where we come to Lake Town. Our heroes are going to spend some time here in Lake Town. Ultimately, this is the last pit stop before they get to the Misty Mountain. They come across, I believe his name is Alfred, kind of like the little, he does look like Grima Wormtongue, but nonetheless, he's like the little caretaker, secretary type person to the king. I guess I don't even know what you'd call him, but the leader of Lake Town. We do spend a lot of time in Lake Town. We find out that Kili was wounded by a Morgul poison from the river fighting scene, so he's actually poisoned, and that's where we go back to Thranduil, Legolas, and Tauriel. It turns out that Tauriel secretly left the kingdom to go and try and save Kili, because she does have feelings for him, and ultimately Legolas is off to go bring her back, because he also cares deeply for her. So some of our heroes go off to the Misty Mountain. With Kili injured, they kind of has to stay back. We kind of branch off into two paths here. So there's the Misty Mountain crew, and then again the remaining people that are in Lake Town. We do get some orcs trying to come in Lake Town and assassinate, and that's when Legolas and Tauriel get involved. There's some cool fight scenes there, I would admit. The rest of the gang heads into the Misty Mountain. They're locked out. They don't know how to get in. They're about to give up. And then Bilbo figures out a way into it. It's similar to almost the Mines of Moria in a way. The entrance, the exploration of the dwarven caves and tunnel systems. And then Bilbo, going and exploring, finds all this gold. You see something shiny. It's the Arkenstone that they're looking for. And all of a sudden the gold starts moving. And we finally get our first appearance of Smaug, played by Benedict Cumberbatch. And I absolutely loved his voice work for Smaug. Again, similar how we got the awesome Gollum and Bilbo talking dialogue scenes. Very much similar again here between Smaug and Bilbo. Great stuff they have. And ultimately, Smaug becomes aware of Bilbo. We get this whole scenes of Bilbo and the dwarves trying to fight Smaug. They kind of feel like they're going to win, and then Smaug, ultimately, again, he's a dragon. Technically, they are aware of a weak spot, but only an arrow bolt from Lake Town that, is foreshadowed can kill him. And Smaug breaks out of Erebor, and it ends on a cliffhanger of him pretty much just saying he's just going to go burn everything. And it's him flying to Lake Town with Bilbo and the rest of the dwarves at Erebor, what have we done? And it just cuts to black. Usually I am not a fan of cliffhangers, but I do really think this cliffhanger leaves you on the edge of your seat, and I think it does work here, so I would put that as a pro. Another pro is a new character, Bard, played by Luke Evans. In the book he is not very fleshed out, but I do think in the movie he does get more screen time, and he does play an integral role to the story, and I thought overall he did a really good job here. Unfortunately, with Tauriel as a new character, why I like her, and she is a new character to the book, and she does add a female presence. I don't like how she's just forced into this love triangle role between her, Legolas, and Kili. I think she falls for the dwarf really fast, soon after they're captured. He has like a conversation with her while he's in a jail cell, gives her like a little totem, gives it to her, and like all of a sudden she like not like head over heels for him, but she does like develop a deep care for him, which I just think progressed a little too quickly. So if Desolation of Smog, while I believe the pacing of this one is better than Unexpected Journey, it does have more action, and it, again, still too long of a movie, or it feels way too long of a movie. They needed to trim more stuff out. Still overuses of CGI, which is just the running theme of this trilogy, unfortunately. So I would say it is a better movie than Unexpected Journey. So I'm going to give it a B for now. We now arrive to the third and final Hobbit movie, which is Hobbit: Battle of the Five Armies. Now, the original Hobbit book essentially ended where Desolation of Smog ended, plus a little bit more. Ultimately, it ends with Smog being killed, and since the whole Hobbit book is from Bilbo's perspective, he gets like knocked out for the Battle of the Five Armies, and essentially we don't ever get to like hear or see anything of it. So Peter Jackson, while still deciding to have Bilbo get knocked out, we still pretty much get to see the entire battle, and essentially that takes up the majority of the movie. Now, coming from Lord of the Rings, Return of the King had this grand epic battle, and you're like, holy crap, it's like a 2+ hour movie and you're telling me like 80% of it's going to be fighting? That's amazing. While in theory that is cool, it isn't ultimately. Again, it's another movie that's drawn way too far out. A lot of stuff should have been cut. With these characters, unlike the ones in the Lord of the Rings movies, you don't care what happens to them, or at least I didn't. Again, besides Bilbo, he's safe, Gandalf makes it through. The dwarves and stuff, when we lose one or two, I just don't care. So there's like no emotional weight in any of like the fights and stuff. Especially, there's still that overusage of CGI, which again breaks believability. So not only do you not really care for the characters, your eyes are like deceiving you of what you see because it's fake. So it only is just so much noise on screen for your eyes. You're just kind of like get this glazed look over yourself while watching it, and it's not like a good thing to have. Another con of this movie, so while a lot of the fighting is happening, Thorin is still in Erebor, and he gets what's known as dragon sickness, where it's pretty much just greed, hungry for gold. That transformation's pretty quick, and we do get foreshadowing this from Smaug, essentially warning Bilbo about what's going to happen. But Thorin, overall at the end of Desolation of Smaug, is still like one of the good guys helping out, and his transformation to being this like greedy, power hungry, that whole transformation happens pretty quick. We don't get like good Thorin until about halfway through the movie, where he finally breaks out of it. I will say the opening scenes for this movie, it picks up right where it left off with Desolation of Smog. He lays waste to Lake Town. That whole action sequence of him going around setting things on fire, pretty much it's only Bard there to stop him. Bard trying to get the arrows, get to the tower, take some shots and misses. Every time he misses, Smog is just laying waste with more fire on the town. That whole opening scenes I thought was really great, and again, it's a great pickup right where we left off of Desolation of Smog. One of the great things from the Lord of the Rings movies is all these stunts that Legolas is able to pull off. We got a little of it in Desolation of Smog. The things he does in this movie is like insane god tier compared to what he's done in any other movie. I enjoy his antics and what he's able to pull off in Return of the King and Two Towers, Fellowship of the Ring. This movie goes above and beyond of what Legolas can do, and here's just a few examples of it right here. Again, I'm all for Legolas being a complete badass, but like some of his stuff is just completely unbelievably insane of what he's able to do. Some more scenes in this movie I really enjoyed is the whole Galadriel versus the Necromancer. I did not talk about the Necromancer stuff in the Desolation of Smog, where Gandalf comes across Dol Guldur and finds him, but I really think this is a cool scene in this movie. Not only do we get Galadriel being a complete badass, but we also get Elrond and Sauron and Gandalf all in the same location, and Sauron. essentially. So it's like the most powerful people in Middle Earth all in one location. And I really enjoyed seeing that. And I love that we get some, little seeds planted on why Sauron wants to turn over to Sauron's side. I thought that was really cool how they started, integrating that, and it transitions really well into Fellowship of the Ring. So Bilbo gets knocked out during a fight, and we have Azog's lieutenant. I believe his name is Borg. Correct me if I'm wrong. He's pretty much fighting Tauriel this whole time, and they're going tit for tat. Ultimately, he does get the better of her for now, and that's when we get Keeley jumps in to try and save her. Ultimately, it's for naught, and he dies. So he's one dwarf we lost. And the final battle, we do get that Thorin versus Azog fight. That was, been waiting for since the first movie to rematch. It'd probably be more impactful if, Azog was like a real character, again, just full CGI. With Thorin as well, even though he's been in all 3 movies and he's a dwarf the most screen time, again, I just don't care necessarily what happens to him. Again, it's just fighting, which is, the fight between them is pretty cool. But again, it's just, if you don't care for the characters on screen, it can only be so good. My last annoyance with this movie is the character of Alfred. Again, we saw him in the last movie. He's just played for comedic chops here, doing, weird antics and being a weasel, essentially. I think he's just used too much. He's essentially, to me, what Jar Jar is to a Phantom Menace to a lot of people. That's dumb comic relief. That's, again, with a movie that has this much action and tension, I guess it's to help levy out some of that with some comedy. But again, his character is just annoying to me. So The Hobbit: Battle of the Five Armies is, again, not a terrible movie by any stretch of the imagination. You didn't like the fighting in the previous 2 movies, then you're probably not going to like this movie much at all, because essentially it is all action. I think it's over-reliant on CGI. The characters, I don't really care at this point what happens to them. But again, there are some really cool scenes. Again, the opening Lake Town stuff is phenomenal. The visuals on that actually really good. The Galadriel Necromancer fight's really good. The tie-ins to the Fellowship of the Ring is really good. And Legolas doing Legolas things, you either love it or hate it. So overall, I'm going to have to give The Hobbit: Battle of the Five Armies a C as well. Again, it's a fine movie. It caps off what it needs to cap off. It ties in everything it needs to in order to progress into Fellowship of the Ring. So The Hobbit: Battle of the Five Armies gets a C from me. Again, it's over-reliant on CGI, way overstuffed. A lot of stuff could be trimmed out. I don't care what happens to these characters, essentially if they live or die. Fighting, some of it's cool, some of it's just clearly noise on screen. And when it's like 80% of the movie, it really does like bog down, and you're left like looking at your watch and like, when is this over? How long is this going to go on? Again, not all of it is bad. The Galadriel Necromancer fight, really cool. The Legolas doing Legolas things, and he does Legolas things in this movie. That can be cool at times. And that Lake Town opening sequence is probably one of my favorite sequences in the entire trilogy from the Hobbit movies. So I think a C is a fair score for this movie. I do think it is a little worse than the Hobbit Unexpected Journey, just because, again, it's all action, not too much substance going on in this movie. This concludes the Hobbit part of this review. So now we're going to jump into the Lord of the Rings movies. So the first Lord of the Rings movie we're going to talk about is Lord of the Rings: Fellowship of the Ring. Precursor before I talk about these 3 movies, I think they're all fantastic movies, and most of my cons are going to be nitpicks. First pro, I'm going to say for all 3 movies right out the gate, is the score by Howard Shore. Again, he did the Hobbit movies as well, but a lot of the Hobbit stuff is more like renditions, little changes here and there to the Lord of the Rings movies. And his score for the Lord of the Rings is so good. All 3 movies, he really knocks out a park for all the themes, and it really amplifies what's on screen. Another pro I'm going to give all 3 of these movies right out the gate is the use of practical effects and makeup. Very little CGI in these movies. Again, in comparison to what we saw in the Hobbit movies, practical makeup on everyone and the miniature sets and stuff they used to build, all of it looks and really still holds up to this day. There's some CGI watching these movies, but you can tell CGI. But again, for the most part, even like the Golem motion capture stuff, again, all of it holds up still really well to this day, even though these movies came out almost 20 years ago. So that's definitely a plus for these movies. And again, these were shot with 24 frames per second, obviously. They have that cinematic feel. Again, they don't have that sitcom-y look that the Hobbit movies decided to do when Peter Jackson wanted to shoot those in 48 frames per second. First thing I want to say about Fellowship of the Ring is the cast. I believe they knocked it out of the park with the entire cast. I believe Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, great casting. Obviously, this is the first time we get Ian McKellen as Gandalf, which is great casting. Orlando Bloom as Legolas is great. Sean Bean as Boromir, who is, I'm going to get into a little bit more, but why I think he is one of the most important and my favorite characters in this entire trilogy. Obviously, the Hobbits were all great casts. And in general, the Fellowship, all of them's great cast, even though a lot of them, the actors they got weren't Peter Jackson's first choice, which is, cool trivia to know about. As the first movie in this trilogy, I believe Fellowship of the Ring sets up the world really well. We get a good sense of Mordor and the evil of Sauron, the orcs. We get to see the world building of the Shire, Rivendell, the Mines of Moria. Like, there's so many sets and scenes in this movie, and they all look phenomenal. I think now's a good time to talk about one of my favorite characters in Boromir. Now, Boromir in the extended edition versus the theatrical edition really gives you different perspectives on his character. In the theatrical edition, I believe he does come off as a bully. He's almost as an antagonist of inside the Fellowship of the Ring to Frodo. But in the extended edition, most of his scenes were cut out or trimmed in some ways. And he's definitely a more complex character, and you understand his reasoning, his decision making, and ultimately is the ring that got the best of him in the end and manipulated him enough, and that's ultimately what caused his downfall. And he's not as much of a snobby bully as he comes off in the theatrical cut. He's ultimately sent to the Council of Elrond by his father to bring the ring back to Gondor so they can use it to defeat Mordor. The whole time he's with the Fellowship in this movie, you just see this push and pull.
I will find no rest here. I heard her voice inside my head. She spoke of my father and the fall of Gondor. She said to me, even now there is hope left. But I cannot see it. It is long since we had any hope. My father is a noble man, but his rule is failing. And our people lose faith. He looks to me to make things right, and I would do it. I would see the glory of Gondor restored. Have you ever seen it, Aragorn? White Tower of Ecthelion, glimmering like a spike of pearl and silver. Its banners caught high in a morning breeze. Have you ever been called home?
That ultimately the ring is trying to manipulate him with, and I think Boromir is a tragic character, and I wish they left more of his stuff in the theatrical cut, because I think a lot more people would appreciate his character than they actually do. One of the reasons why Boromir is one of my favorite characters is ultimately how he goes out. I feel like his whole death scene is, again, it's played for his redemption moment in the movie, and he's fighting off Uruk to let Merry and Pippin try and get away. Ultimately, they still get captured, but he, takes 3 arrows from Lurtz, and he's still, fighting off Uruk-hai to save him. I believe it really showed how much of a warrior he was and his strength and resolve, and how much he did care for the hobbits. And then his talk of Aragorn, pretty much just giving the throne to Aragorn, saying, you need to go accept your destiny, go be the king, do what I can where I have failed. I think the whole, last little bit with Boromir was really good, and I'm glad at least they didn't cut any of that in the theatrical cut. Another really cool scene in this movie is the birth of the Uruk-hai. So up until this point, it's mainly just been orcs and goblins that we see, and while they are scary, they're miniature, they're like hunched over and stuff, they're not like physically imposing, but the Uruk-hai are literally like tanks in this movie. They're so muscular, they are built, and the scene where they're getting dug out the ground and like the one like just snaps the neck of the orc, and we ultimately find out that it's Lurtz, who's like the captain that Saruman sends to hunt down the Fellowship. I really liked his introduction to Uruk-hai because they are like a physically imposing force, even though later on they still pretty much cannon fodder and die as easily as orcs, except for Lurtz with that final fight with Aragorn. Which again was really cool and like intense. The Uruk-hai at least, looked threatening. Again, with the 3 Lord of the Rings movies, I don't have too many cons, essentially. A lot of it's going to be like nitpicking. And again, because it is an adaptation from the books, some of these plot points is just directly derived from the books. So I guess technically it's not the movie's fault, but anyway, it is like the story's fault. So I'm still going to include them here. One nitpick I do have with the Fellowship of the Ring is in the opening scene we get like the Elrond Isildur Second Age battle of how like they got the One Ring from Sauron, and kind of like the precursor to how we got to this point in this universe. I never liked how Elrond just let Isildur walk away and not throw it into the fire of Mount Doom. I wish he would have put up more of a fight or struggle, because he does know like the ring needs to be destroyed. He tells Isildur that, but Isildur just says pretty much, nope, I'm going to keep it. And Elrond just like, even though he disagrees, he doesn't really do anything. And I know a lot of people have a problem with, well, why didn't the Eagles just, take the Fellowship or 1 or 2 and just go to Mount Doom and drop it away? But I have a bigger problem with Elrond just letting Isildur walk away. But again, it's a nitpick. Another nitpick I have with this movie in particular is Frodo's multiple fake out deaths. I think they like try and make him fake out die one too many times. Obviously him getting stabbed in a Morgul blade, I don't really count that necessarily as a fake out death, because that was like a real threat. It is kind of like a fake out because he's on horseback with Arwen. She summons the river, washes them away, they look like they're in a clear, and then Frodo just starts like gasping for air and hyperventilating and stuff, and it kind of looks like, this is it for Frodo. But it, goes to a white screen and he's in Rivendell and got cured. I'm more specifically talking about the Mines of Moria, where he gets stabbed by a troll, or later on, a couple seconds later, find out that the mithril armor that Bilbo gave to him stopped the piercing of the little spear. But how they played the scene, it really like made it look like Frodo got stabbed. And essentially, like, once Aragorn and stuff come over and like go to check on Frodo after he got stabbed, he's like, oh, I'm fine, guys, and he lifts up his shirt and shows the armor. Like he literally, when he got stabbed, plays it off and he dies and like collapses, where if he was like fine, then he wouldn't have done all that. I thought that's just like, come on, they don't need like fake out death there. My last nitpick with this movie is I do feel like the extended edition is the superior version. Now with the other two movies, why I always watch all three extended versions of these movies now, I never go back to the theatrical cut. I believe Fellowship of the Ring got shafted the most on what scenes they decided to trim and cut out. I believe it did affect the narrative of this movie more so than the scenes they cut out in Two Towers and Return of the King. With all that still being said, Fellowship of the Ring, a fantastic movie. It is not quite S tier in terms of the trilogy. I believe if we're just, ranking movies, it'll probably be S tier on a bunch of other lists, but in terms of the Middle-earth movies, I believe there is one that is superior, so I do have to give it an A, even though it's a very high A. It'll probably be S on a lot of you guys' lists, and in general movie, like top movies of all time, it'll probably be an S in that rank, but just judging by Middle-earth films, I'm going to give Fellowship of the Ring an A. It is time to talk about Lord of the Rings and the Two Towers, the movie which I believe personally is the greatest cinematic battle sequence we've ever seen on the screen, that being the Helm's Deep battle. Now with Two Towers, most of the returning cast comes back, and again, they phenomenal job as they are in all three movies. With the Two Towers specifically, we're introduced to a new area in Rohan, and we get a lot of new supporting characters from there, and again, all of them are also really good. Again, the casting in all three of these movies ultimately really good. There's not like a weak actor or actress, I personally believe, in any of these movies. Now in the Fellowship of the Ring, most of our cast, as in the Fellowship, they're all together, so the story follows like one progressive narrative line with everyone together. The Two Towers picks up where we left off, where we have this Frodo and Sam storyline, we have Merry and Pippin captured storyline, and we have Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli together. So there's like three branching storylines, and it can be really hard to juggle in a movie where you care for all three things happening at once. But I feel like the Two Towers does do a really good job of making you care for all three. For the most part, I do believe some of the later stuff of Merry and Pippin with the Ents is very slow, and a lot of it is pretty boring. But I believe at least the Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli stuff is really good, as well as Frodo, Sam, and the introduction to Gollum to them is also really good. So they do nail 2 out of 3, and the third one, again, it is a little slow and dull at times, but again, it's not a complete failure. So I'm going to give you guys some of my favorite scenes from the movie. Obviously, the introduction of wargs and that whole warg fight in the field, really cool. The whole slow motion Legolas flipping onto a horse. Again, it looks wonky and stuff, but it's pretty much the introduction of these movies of Legolas just doing crazy acrobatic stunts. And we get, at the conclusion of this, we get one of my favorite lines from an orc laughing, telling Legolas that Aragorn took a little tumble off the cliff. We also get some really good stuff with Frodo, Sam, and Gollum. Not only, I believe, a little later on when they're at the Forbidden Pool and Faramir is introduced, but we get the whole potato scene, which is also probably one of this movie's most memorable scenes. Again, it is played for comedics here, but I believe this is when comedy is done really well, where I believe in the Hobbit movies, the comedy they tried forcing in that movie doesn't hit as well as it does in these movies. So the majority of this movie is leading up to Saruman unleashing the entirety of Isengard's forces to essentially just wipe out all of Rohan, kill everyone and everything in its way, and just ultimately it's going to come down to a big battle at Helm's Deep. And like I said in the beginning of this part, Helm's Deep battle is, I think, the most cinematic and best on-screen battle we've ever seen in a movie. There's tension leading up to it, there's tension during it, there's drama. We have tons of casualties on both sides. The pure carnage from both sides is, I think, it's just a masterpiece, all under the backdrop of nighttime and the freezing rain. So good. It is foreshadowed earlier in the movie that Gandalf's going to go try and bring reinforcements, and they literally come at the last second. As you see, like, there's probably only like 15 to 20 warriors, some of them being our main heroes, left by the end of Helm's Deep, where they started out with hundreds. So again, tons of casualties in this movie. If I did have a little nitpick, again, we do lose Haldir, we like an elf from the reinforcement elf army, but none of the main heroes die. Is it realistic? Probably not, but again, it's a movie, so you just have to go with, probably some of the main characters aren't going to die. Obviously, we did get Boromir's death. We do get, at least Haldir, who was in the first movie as well. So the fact I didn't expect Aragorn, Legolas, or Gimli to die, I can see someone having a problem with suspension of disbelief if all three of them were able to get out, especially how some of them were involved and they were on the front lines a lot of this battle. Another nitpick I have of this movie is, for the life of me, I don't understand how the Ents did not know what Saruman was doing. When Treebeard is going to, drop Merry and Pippin off to go back home, he comes across a big part of Fangorn Forest that was destroyed, cut down, burned, and it's a total shock to him of what happened. And I just don't understand how no Ents or anyone knew any of the stuff that's been going on for, I assume, days and weeks now, for how much destruction of the forest is happening. Again, trees, how did they talk to each other, or how did Ents not fight back if they're getting cut down? I don't understand that part. I don't know if they explain it in the books, and I haven't really been able to find an answer. Another scene I really wanted to highlight with this movie is ultimately when Faramir lets Sam and Frodo go from Osgiliath. Frodo is pretty much just, defeated a little at this point, and Sam gives a really nice monologue. I really do like this scene because it just amplifies Sam as a character and how he never gives up in any of these movies. Obviously, the ring weighs a heavy toll on Frodo. Sam realizes this, and in all three movies, and then specifically this whole speech, he really shows how strong of a character he is. So now it comes time to rank Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. Now, it's definitely not B, C, or D. I always get, my opinion sways on this movie a lot. I think it's the one I watch the most and will go back and watch the most. But I'm going to rank it an A, above Fellowship of the Ring. I believe it does a good job of raising the stakes where Fellowship of the Ring left off. Again, a couple nitpicks here that keep it from being that S tier movie, and obviously compared to most movies it is S tier, but if I'm comparing the Lord of the Rings movies together, I'm going to give Fellowship of the Ring an A, probably The Two Towers an A+, and that leaves us with Return of the King next. So Lord of the Rings Return of the King is the most decorated Middle-earth film in terms of awards, but does that necessarily make it the best? Well, I personally think so. I'm just gonna, get it out of the way here, and it definitely is an S, and I'm gonna explain and my reasoning why I think it's the best. I believe this movie takes everything built upon, set up from the first two movies, and pays off every storyline. There's not really any loose ends in this movie, and it takes up the action and dials it up to an 11. The whole Osgiliath battle alone is really good, but that's only the appetizer to what we get when it comes to Minas Tirith and Valinor Fields. Real quick, I'm going to get my cons out of the way first, and then I'm going to go into all the things I love about this movie. So again, I think this movie, it is the longest out of the three. I believe there are parts that could be trimmed and just put into the extended edition, because there already is an extended edition. That movie's 4 hours long or whatever. Another nitpick I have of this movie is the multiple endings. There's a lot of parts where okay, this could be the ending of the movie, and then kind of fades to black, and then fades into a new scene, and it does that I believe 2 or 3 times. And this is ultimately, once the end coronation of Aragorn, and you feel okay, that's a good ending point. The movie still has 30 minutes to go, it feels like. I know it's pretty close to 30 minutes. So the multiple endings, again, it's just more stuff that I thought could have been trimmed down. Another scene I just wish was explained a little better. I don't have any problem with the scene itself, besides just I wish it was explained more, is the whole Eowyn killing the Witch King. Essentially, you're just led because she is a woman, and the Witch King says no man can kill me, and she takes off her helmet and is I am no man. But it is, I believe, more in depth than that, and it's not just because she's a woman. The blade Mary stabbed him with has a lot to do with it. There's this whole prophecy behind the Witch King as well, and I just wish they delved into more of that. No, it's not just because she's a woman. There is a little bit more to that, and I just wish they explained that a little bit better. The Army of the Dead, I understand why it's in the movie. It just felt a little to me like a cheat code in ways. where when they're brought into the battle, essentially they just wipe everything out. You know, they're not gonna die or anything. I did like their scenes when Aragorn has to go recruit them. They're creepy. It was a little tension filled, but ultimately, again, it's like a cheat code whenever they arrive. Any sense of like our heroes losing at that point just goes out the window because, again, the ghost can't die. So now, again, I get to talk about all the things I love about this movie. The Shelob scenes, very stressful to me when Frodo's running around in the cave, running into spiderwebs, getting chased by a giant spider. All being narrated from Gollum in the shadows is really creepy. And then ultimately, Frodo gets stabbed and gets taken away to Cirith Ungol. And then Sam now has to pick up the file and fight Shelob. Again, I don't like spiders, they creep me out, so a giant spider battle is creepy to me. Again, all the battle sequences I thought were really good. A lot of them have this sense of dread, and a lot of casualties actually happen in this movie. Whether it's Asciliath and the orcs are just slaying all Faramir's soldiers. Faramir's charge sacrifice is a really sad scene, which I absolutely loved, but not obviously for the characters itself. It's really bad. Faramir's essentially throwing his life away.
Faramir! Faramir! Your father's will has turned to madness. Do not throw away your life so rashly.
Where does my allegiance lie if not here? This is the city of the men of Numenor. I will gladly give my life to defend her beauty, her memory, her wisdom.
Your father loves you, Faramir. You will remember it before the end.
Home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread through shadow to the edge of night, until the stars are all alight. Mist and shadow, cloud and shade, all shall fade, all shall fade.
Denethor just sent his son to pretty much to kill himself, to go try and capture something that they know they won't be able to recapture. And that whole sequence is kind of like sung in the background by Billy Boyd. His song Edge of Night just really made that scene that much more impactful. Then we get all the carnage inside Minas Tirith, and I think nothing, explains that whole carnage more. But when the front gate finally gets busted and you're just expecting like an army of orcs to rush through, but no, it's fully decked out armored cave trolls, and you just see Gandalf's like a shocked expression on his face, and it's just trolls smashing dudes left and right, which is crazy. Again, a lot of carnage in this movie, a lot of depths, and as fans of like war movies and battles and stuff, I do appreciate all the carnage. Another thing I really liked about this movie is the whole Sam and Gollum dynamic. So early on, Sam catches wind, he wakes up and hears Gollum and Smeagol kind of like talking to each other and plotting how they're going to overthrow. Sam, goes and starts beating him up. Frodo gets him off. Frodo at this point's like kind of self-aware of like Gollum's not trustworthy, but they need a guide because there's no other way they're going to be able to get to Mount Doom without him. So Sam kind of just like reluctantly let him live and go along. The ring manipulates Frodo enough later on to where Frodo kind of like cascades Sam aside, and even though Sam did nothing wrong, but again, it just shows the strength and resolve of Sam's character. But the whole tit for tat, and then ultimately ending with Sam and Gollum fighting outside Mount Doom while Frodo runs in, and then their whole fight. I really like the whole Sam versus Gollum dynamic in this movie. Lastly, a scene that gives me goosebumps every time I watch, which I absolutely love, is when the Rohirrim show up the battle and you hear the horns, and then you just see the waves of Rohirrim come in line. And then Theoden's whole speech, the motivational speech with the music blaring in the background. Yeah, and every time I hear it, it gives me goosebumps, and it's a great scene. And then when they charge and just run through all of those orcs, and again, you feel like that's only like just part of the battle, because then it's time for the enemy to bring their reinforcements, and then you get the Muma kill, and they kind of like turn the tide on over here. I'm just running through them. Again, the whole tit for tat, each side getting good blows in, I really do appreciate. It's not one-sided either way the whole movie. It's a little evil favored going on, of course. That's just to build tension and dread. The good guys definitely get their good blows in too. Obviously, Legolas has done shenanigans in other movies. In this one, he does get to take down an elephant, which is pretty cool to see. So guys, overall, Lord of the Rings Return of the King, I do believe it deserves that S. Lord of the Rings Return of the King ended up being nominated for multiple Oscars and winning 11 of them. I think it's the film has won the most Oscars in history, and it definitely deserves them in my opinion. That's why I'm giving Lord of the Rings Return of the King an S. Alrighty guys, this concludes my Middle-earth review series / ranking. Let me know how you guys think I did in the comments below. Let me know what you guys would rank them personally as well in the comments below. If you liked the video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Again, I like trying to do one of these review / ranking series once a week. So if you guys have any suggestions or anything you want to see coming up soon, any film franchises, director categories, or actor, filmographies, please let me know. And again, until next time guys, thanks for watching.